And we're back on a hopefully happy hump day like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your happy hump day here with me as I drive home in New York. Once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. So I appear to have a cold. I thought that I had an allergic reaction to something over the weekend. The pollen count is high. I live in an area where the tree pollen is through the roof. I got allergies. So I'm sitting here thinking I had allergies since Saturday, and I woke up this morning. I said, I think I have a cold. So I can't get you sick, which is good, but hopefully my voice being a little bit more nasal than usual is not too much of a problem. I don't sound terrible, I don't think. But anyway, I was once again racking my brain, trying to think of movies that meant a lot to me, still mean a lot to me, that, in my opinion, rise to the level of great movies, for the great movie series. And I came up with a film that I have talked about, but I've talked about it with relation to its lead actor and kind of indirectly because I went into detail about its sequel, which there were a lot of problems in the production and eventual release of its sequel. We're talking, of course, about OG 1978 Superman, directed by Richard Donner and starring one of my favorite people to ever work in the movie business, and it's still so gutting that he's been gone 21, 22 years, and that he was so young when he was struck down, Christopher Reeve. But Superman 1978, in its own way, is a miracle, because we're in an era now, and we have been in an era since Blade in 98, but if you want to push it up further and say Robert Downey Jr.'s Iron Man in 2008, I won't take any issue with that. Although I do like that Wesley Snipes appeared as Blade in Deadpool versus Wolverine to kind of, literally tie it up there that this is the same universe, even though there weren't any other MCU movies, MCU proper, after 1998's Blade. But there was a time, and this time specifically in the middle 1970s, where Warner Brothers, the bigwigs there, had an idea. Why don't we try to mount a big budget, cutting-edge special effects of the day movie about the comic book character Superman, which at that time, it's almost stupid to say it like this, but the character was less than 40 years old. Siegel and Schuster had created the comic, and I want to say the first issue came out in the late 1930s. I think it came out in the late 30s, like 1938 is what I'm thinking. But there was a lot of pushback against the idea of mounting this sort of production, because they'd say, well, how are we going to make this believable? How are we going to believably make a movie where we're going to have an actor, and presumably a big name actor, and he's going to be wearing close to comic book accurate costume? The guy's got his underwear on outside of his pants. It's going to be a laughing stock. We shouldn't do it. We're going to spend a lot of money, and we're all going to look like idiots. These were the arguments that were going on at the WB in the mid-1970s. But there was an idea that it could work, that there is nothing intrinsically wrong about the idea of making a big-budget comic book movie. And it seems almost idiotic now because it's such big box office now. The IP, it's like they're printing money. If you make even a serviceable film and you keep the budget within certain constraints, you're going to turn a profit. And Deadpool versus Wolverine, it's okay, but they weren't breaking any new ground there. And look at how enormous of a box office hit that was. But 50 years ago, it was deemed to be too big of a risk, and there were a lot of people that just kept saying, we're going to throw our money away, we're all going to get fired. The old Jim Carrey joke after The Cable Guy, where he got paid $20 million right off the top. He was the first actor to get a $20 million check for a movie. And the film was good, but it didn't do as well as it was supposed to. And Jim Carrey, when he picked up, I think it was an MTV Movie Award for Best Performance, his performance is incredible in that film. But what Jim Carrey said, the obvious, he said, I really would like to thank the studio executives at Paramount who believed in me and who believed in this project. I hope you all found jobs. And the audience cracked up, but I don't think Jim Carrey was kidding. I hope you all found jobs. They all got fucking fired. When Last Action Hero didn't perform as well in the United States, guys like Barry Josephson, I don't think that he felt the knife, but there were a lot of executives that either got fired or reassigned. So there is a lot of pressure. And sometimes just making the safe choice is the way to go. But the studio heads at Warner were convinced, we can do this. And, they did have proof as far as big budget spectacle movies, heavy on the special effects, which worked. For example, The Towering Inferno. Now, there are some dated elements in that film, but the practical effects, the kind of wire work, the fire effects, there's no CGI, there's no green screen in that film. They're using mechanical, practical effects, and the effect, it's fantastic. I mean, it's not a great movie, but man, Steve McQueen fucking kills that. He's amazing in that film. So when Warner decided that they wanted to go forward with a movie about Superman, the original plan was what you would expect. We need to get a big star, and we need to surround him with, the right kind of cast. Obviously, you would cast around, like, you're not going to have the same cast with Robert Pattinson as you might with Jacob Elordi. You might think indifferent, like if you're doing something like that now. You try to match actors and actresses and actors a certain way based on screen persona, temperament, all of these things. The executives know this part of the business, they know how to do. But the original plan, when they had a green light, we need to get a big actor, we need a big movie star to justify the budget, and we're going to take our chances that the effects work and the costumes and the makeup is going to be good enough where we're not left out of the theater. And that was a fear, even with the executives who pushed hard for the project. There's a version of this where we're all going to get laughed out of the theater, and we're not going to work again. We're all going to get canned, and that's going to be it. I hope we've got savings. This is all real. This all happened. So, as crazy as it seems, the first guy they went to, I believe, was Robert Redford. There were some reports that said Warren Beatty was offered the role first, but I'm pretty sure it was Redford. But either way, either one of those guys, they already had too much. They already had been in the business too long. It wouldn't have worked. Now, out of those two, Redford was the better choice. No question about it. It might be a little bit controversial to say that he had the kind of all-American boyish good looks with the hair, and, and Beatty's reputation as a ladies' man, you could have got a little bit of an angle there with Lois. That might have got some laughs. But Redford turned it down. And Robert Redford, God bless him, may he rest in eternal cinematic paradise. Robert Redford was one of those people who was so careful. He hated to piss people off. He didn't want people to, have a bad feeling about him or anything. So the way that he got out of it, he didn't turn it down. Oh, I forgot to mention, they hired the best writer they could find, Mario Puzo, to write the screenplay. Mario Puzo of The Godfather, The Sicilian, the guy who literally wrote those books. So Redford didn't just turn it down. He asked for an amount of money he knew they weren't going to go for. So he made it seem as if he was into it when he wasn't. And he asked for an amount of money where they had no choice. And bro, this is going to be a $50 to $60 million production in 1977, 78. We can't pay you $10 million. No offense. Or words to that effect. So Redford didn't want to do it. Beatty passed immediately. And then, this is nuts, they went to Clint Eastwood. I am the biggest Clint Eastwood fan of all time. That's my guy. Clint Eastwood, number one. Arnold Schwarzenegger, number two. Those are my two favorite people to ever work in the movie business. Christopher Reeve is number three. They go to Clint. And Clint he must have been howling. The Clint Eastwood of the Any Which Way But Loose movies, that guy is going to play Clark Kent. He could have played Clark Kent because he does a thing with glasses where he seems like a nerd in the movie The Iger Sanction. It could have worked. But Clint already looked too old. He already looked too old to believably play Clark Kent, Superman. It just wouldn't work. It was a crazy idea. So Clint said he was too busy. He gave them an excuse. And then they went to James Caan. And the irony of going to Caan is that 12, 13, 14 years later, Redford and Beatty were the first two guys to get cracks at Misery, and they didn't turn it down. They were involved in the project for months, but both guys ended up exiting the project because they couldn't agree with the studio's demand of, we have to keep that hobbling scene from the book where Annie cuts off the bottom of Paul's foot. And Redford said, no, we're not doing this. We will lose the audience. You guys go ahead and make your movie. If you're insistent, go fuck yourself. And then when Beatty came in, he said the same thing. He said, I love this project, but you guys are dead wrong. He left, and then Khan ended up doing it, but they ended up taking it out anyway. That's the funny part. They ended up softening the scene after all that nonsense. We could have had Misery with either Redford or Beatty. Now, that's one I think Beatty works in for sure. Again, with the ladies' man reputation, they would have done something with that. They totally would have done something with that. James Caan said, "There's no way I'm getting into that silly suit." I think that's a direct quote from old Jimmy, another late great actor. Man, loved James Caan, or Jimmy as everybody called him. So with the quote-unquote big stars not in play, you know, Warner Brothers, you have to go to plan B. They wanted to make the movie, and they went with the notion of, let's get the biggest names, the best actors that we can for the supporting roles. We'll find an unknown or somebody kind of unknown, like the new guy, David Corenswet. There were some people who knew him and were excited as soon as he was cast. But there were others. I never heard of him. I mean, I don't want to seem so ignorant, but I didn't know who he was. But the idea was, we'll get huge names to surround either a relative unknown or an unknown, and we'll just take our chances. So after, a process where a lot of different young actors were interviewed and auditioned, Richard Donner to his last. Man, I love Richard Donner. But Richard Donner to his last, and he even says this in the documentary on Christopher Reeve called Superman, the Christopher Reeve story. He said, the minute I saw the kid, I said, that's the guy. That's the guy. That's him. Well, we think he's a little skinny. He's a stage actor. That's great. That's the guy. That's my guy. That's my Superman. That's my Clark Kent. So they start processing, okay, we're going to go with this kid. Maybe he can bulk up or he can use fake muscles. The thing with Christopher Reeve and Henry Cavill, and to some extent David Corenswet, they have not really taken criticism, but there's a lot of jokes about Henry Cavill, and if the social media era existed in the 70s, the same jokes would have been lobbed at Christopher Reeve. Just as Henry Cavill is a genetic mega freak, you're not supposed to look like that guy. You're not supposed to be built like that guy. You're not supposed to have the smile of that guy. He's the kind of guy that if he weren't so nice, every man would hate his guts. Well, Christopher Reeve is another one who was a sweetheart of a guy. Everybody said from when he was a kid, when he was first starting out in theater, what a nice guy. You're not supposed to look like that. You're not supposed to be 6'4", and even without having worked out, not a scrap of fat on him, perfect hair, perfect teeth, perfect smile. Go fuck. It's the same thing. So they started to think, who can we cast in the other roles? And honestly, as much criticism as he has taken over the decades, getting Marlon Brando was the key. It was the key. As much as even Christopher Reeve, who was not really a guy who tried to be polarizing, he felt that Brando did not give his best effort. The irony of Brando is the guy was so good. He was so good that he could phone it in and still be amazing and just right on the button. I think Brando is fucking great in the first Superman. He's not in it that much. And then in the Donner cut, the second one, but I talked about that in an earlier episode. I don't want to get bogged down on that. He has a much bigger role in the original iteration of what Richard Donner was trying to do with Superman 2 before he got fired. But getting Brando was the key. And I feel like Brando was more comfortable. Yeah, they paid him $5 million for, 10 minutes. I understand that helped a lot. Anthony Hopkins always jokes around. They say, did you love this or that script? And he says, no, I love the paycheck. Acting like, I don't really give a shit what's in there as long as you pay me. But Brando brought credibility. He brought gravitas. And when he signed on, and all of a sudden, here comes Gene Hackman, and here comes Ned Beatty, and here comes, she just passed, Valerie Perrine. I'm sorry, she played Miss Tessmacher in the film. And with those really terrific actors, especially Ned Beatty, what an underrated talent he was, just great. Then it was a question of casting Lois Lane, and there's a lot of really, if you're interested, there's a lot of really cool footage of Christopher Reeve screen testing with a number of different actresses. Now, if I didn't know what I was looking at, if I'm just looking at Leslie Ann Warren, who ended up having the biggest career of the women who screen tested that I've seen, Susan Blakely, who had a pretty good career herself, Margot Kidder, the late Margot Kidder, who ended up getting the role, and an actress I was unfamiliar with named Deborah Raffin. Now, where I was going with this, if I had never seen a Superman movie, let's say that I was a 20-year-old kid in film school right now, and I did not know that much about comic book movies, And I just watched the screen tests of all the actresses who were up for Lois Lane. I would have picked Deborah Raffin. I feel like, at least in the screen tests, she had a better handle on the character even than Margot Kidder, which is crazy because in the movie, Kidder lit it up. I don't think her screen test was as good as what she ended up doing on screen. But the overriding point is that they got the cast exactly right. And Christopher Reeve worked out, and it sounds like an apocryphal story, but it's real. The actor who played the body of Darth Vader, not James Earl Jones, the voice, but the literal corporeal body, David Prowse, who plays the manservant with the good body and the good physique in A Clockwork Orange, just for reference, David Prowse. A very nice, a very beautiful British accent that he had. But David Prowse worked out with Christopher Reeve, put him on a very serious training program, and Reeves started eating a ton. And again, the genetics, Christopher Reeve started eating 8,000 calories a day, and all of the working out. What happened? Did he put on an ounce of fat? No. Every pound he gained was muscle. I mean, again, if he weren't who he was, people back then would have been like, this is not fair. It's not fair. He looked ridiculous to begin with. How is this real? So, Donner had a lot of ideas that the studio was not necessarily all on board with, and he started quarreling with the Salkins. Those were the Ilya, the brothers that owned the property and worked on it through Warner Brothers. But they were able to figure out certain methods and processes to make the flying scenes look even more realistic than the executives, in 1976-ish, going into 77, when they were saying, we can do this. Donner figured out ways using different methods of lighting and different kinds of wires and cables. And the reality is, there are moments where Christopher Reeve's character floats away or elevates. It looks better than the CGI in 2013's Man of Steel. It's not even close. And that's one reason why, if you go on YouTube, many young movie reactors who may be familiar with the Henry Cavill movie or movies that he was in, including Justice League and Batman versus Superman, but people are familiar with those films and the 2025 film. Everybody is to some level of shock at how well the effects work. Still holds up, almost 50 years later. We're getting on to 47 plus years because the film was released in Christmas 1978. So I haven't seen archival either interviews with people or old magazines, like maybe a film comment from 78. I don't know that there were people thinking, based on watching the dailies and the rushes as the film was in production, oh, this is going to be a catastrophe, the studio is fucked. I don't know if that, nowadays we know all of that stuff, and sometimes it ends up being wrong. I can remember in the early 2000s, when The Bourne Identity, the first one with Matt Damon, was in production, everyone who was talking about behind the scenes stuff, they all said the same thing. This film is going to be a turkey. It is in huge trouble. It's just all wrong. Damon is miscast. Everyone is saying this shit, and then look what happened. A franchise that Damon was fantastic there. Are you kidding me? He was perfectly cast. Give me a break. Sometimes people just like to complain. But when Superman landed, and I think the first premiere was not in New York, it may have been in London, and I'm sorry, I think I got this wrong, I apologize. But from the first time audiences saw the completed film, and yes, there is a longer version which famously aired on TV in the early 1980s, and a lot of fans who had recently seen the original version, maybe on Betamax or something, they were stunned by how much extra footage. I think the extra footage is all a lot of fun, but I think the theatrical cut of that movie is better. I do believe that it's better. It's okay to watch them both, but to me, the theatrical cut is the way to go. If I'm just asked, a random fan, which should I've never seen it, which should I watch? I recommend the theatrical cut. But anyway, the buzz started to build. Warner Brothers knocked this out of the park. Richard Donner, the direction is magnificent. It's perfectly cast. And whoever this kid is, named Christopher Reeve, a stage actor, where the fuck did they find this guy? It's like he was created specifically for this role. And as I say, he's one of the few people in the movie business, when Clint Eastwood, hopefully 10 years from now, when he's over 100, when he passes, I'm going to be very emotional. I'm going to be broken up by it, no doubt about it. But it's difficult for me to talk about Reeve without getting emotional, because he was the Superman. He was my Superman. My parents took me to the movie on its opening weekend. It was right around Christmas of 1978. And I was 5 years old. I hadn't even turned 5. I turned 5 December 29th. I don't think that I had turned 5. I think we saw it opening weekend. Up to that point, obviously, it was the best movie I'd ever seen. But I really believed that I had seen a man fly. It didn't look like effects. It looked like the guy was flying around. I had process shots, rear projection. None of this shit made any of that. I'm a little kid. I'm 5 years old. The film was an enormous success, not just at the box office, but with critics. And even critics who weren't like super enthused, giving it 4 stars, like Roger Ebert, for example, was a huge fan, and he thought the film was a masterpiece. But even critics who didn't unabashedly love it, a lot of them said words to the effect of, at least we know that this kind of movie can work. At least we know it's possible to mount this sort of a big production, take risks, and the risks might actually pay off. So the total budget, the production and marketing budget, is somewhere, it's listed as 55. I feel like it's probably a little bit more. But $55 million for 1978, I don't need to tell you. You do your time value of money, you start computing. That's a big budget, That's a big budget, especially because the lead actor is not getting 20 million, right? I don't know what Christopher Reeve made. He probably made a couple of $100,000. Maybe he got points. I have no idea what he made. But seeing that film in theaters, the excitement, and thinking that Superman was going to die, and I didn't understand, I wasn't old enough. My dad told me years later, he said, the thing with the kryptonite didn't connect. You didn't get it. I was like, well, what do you mean I didn't get it? Well, which part didn't I get? He said, well, when Superman was sinking, you said, well, why can't Superman swim? I wasn't calculating. It didn't hit me why Superman couldn't swim. It's not that he couldn't swim. It was that the kryptonite was slowly killing him, and that's why he wasn't able to surface. Anyway, so I was too young to really grasp the concepts, but I just knew this was an incredible movie. And in my opinion, to this day, Christopher Reeve is still the gold standard. He's the gold standard. Forget Superman. It's the best casting in any superhero movie. It's not even close. Look, Robert Downey Jr., Hugh Jackman could be 2 and 3. Reeve is the single best casting, not only of superhero movies, but it might be the best casting in the last 50 years of Hollywood. You want to go back to Clint Eastwood and Dirty Harry or the spaghetti westerns, that's the level we're talking about. That's how perfectly cast he was. He even looked like the guy in the comics, for crying out loud. Amazing. So Superman grossed over $300 million worldwide. Again, that's a big gross now for 1978 into 79, and tallies for revivals when the movie was brought back into theaters a few more times in succeeding years. Before home video, I always bring this up, but it's important for the youngins to understand. In this case, by youngins, I might even mean under 40. I'm getting up there myself. But it's difficult to imagine a world where the only way to see a movie in a theater, or if it happens to be airing on TV at a particular time in which you can get to a TV, that's it. So very popular movies like Superman, like Star Wars, were often rolled back out into theaters, special screenings, 60 millimeter, whatever the nonsense that they would do to try to get more people in. But the over 300 is reflects the fact that the film, as the original Star Wars trilogy, was brought back a number of times to theaters to roll up more money, because there was still interest from people who maybe their kids were too young. We don't know, but something like that. Now, it also must be said, if I'm asked a question right now, if somebody had asked me an hour ago, what do you think is the single best film score? What is the best film score ever in cinema? I'm saying John Williams' score for Superman, 1978. And there are certainly people who would disagree, but there are also people who will say, that's the answer, and it's not even close. He took certain cues and certain notions and concepts. All great composers do this. From Star Wars, because there are certain similarities if you just focus on it. And I love the Star Wars score. Darth Vader theme, incredible. Luke Skywalker theme, incredible. John Williams' main theme for Superman, and the track called Planet Krypton. They are next level. They are on a higher level than anything else, in my opinion, that John Williams did. And John Williams did so many, you almost can't calculate how many great scores that had nothing to do with the franchises, whether Star Wars, whether Indiana Jones. Raiders Marches, and I put that in his top 3. That's another one where you say, how is it even possible to create music this good? How? I don't know. It's just John Williams. He had the magic. And then you look at the work that he did in a movie I mentioned, last week, The Witches of Eastwick, and that's a score where there are elements of that score in both Home Alone and Harry Potter. That's probably, if that's not Williams' best, like kind of under the radar score, I think that's his best under the radar score, because when people think of that movie, they think of Jack going ham and the ladies and boy, Michelle Pfeiffer's so hot or whatever they're thinking, and Cher looks great. But Williams' score there is stupendous. But his score for Superman, it's like not Shawn Michaels, oh my God, it's the Bret Hart of film scores. The best there was, the best there is, and the best there will ever be. You can't do it any better. I mean, even my grandfather, we were watching a movie about 25 years ago on DVD, and my grandpa said, the music almost sounds like it's about a guy flying around. How is that real? Well, there you go. Again, how is that real? The word that Richard Donner used, despite the fact that the guy's got his underwear on outside the costume, the boots, and it could be farce, his word was verisimilitude. Within the realm of what I just said, we have a story with a guy flying around and he has superpowers and kryptonite can kill him, all of that stuff. I want this to be as realistic as possible. I want to go for real human emotions. Richard Donner was trying to make a movie not like the MCU, a little bit closer to what DC tried. You could say they went a little bit too grim. But when, for example, Martin Scorsese talked about the MCU as much as he enjoys them and they're very entertaining, he said it's theme park cinema. It's theme park stuff. And you could tell that Scorsese, who's so likable, he kind of turns his nose down on it. He's not really, he wouldn't put it in the same category as even, let's say, Spielberg's Back to the Future, which is very, very silly, but he would see that as cinema. But Superman the movie is one of those special films, and Christopher Reeve was one of those special people. Perfectly cast, and Donner shot most of the first two movies concurrently. It was a little bit like what they ended up doing in it was actually in 2000, I think, when they shot the three Lord of the Rings movies, buck to buck to buck, and a belly to belly to belly, in the immortal words of John Sterling. But they shot the first one, and they got about 3/4 of the way through what would become Superman 2 when Donner was fired. And that's a story that I talked about in the episode Superman 2, which version is better or something like that. But the original Superman stands tall. And if somebody says that to this day, this is still the best superhero movie ever made, because there had to be a kind of grounding. There had to be a bedrock to show we can do this. We can not just turn a profit, we can make a great movie. And Richard Donner and the entire cast and crew and the effects people and the practical effects being so top level. And that's where, again, you get the big budget. A lot of it is effects. The scene where Lois is hanging off the building. I mean, yeah, you know that they're on a soundstage, but it feels like it's really happening. And that's the magic of the movie and of what Richard Donner was able to achieve with certain angles to sell it even to an even greater extent than I think other filmmakers. You could take, I think that Spielberg could have made the movie just as good, but there aren't too many. James Cameron in later era for sure would have made the movie just as good, given the same script. But of course, if he has 1991 era special effects, he's making a different film. If the effects had advanced to the point of when he was able to do Terminator 2, another movie, by the way, that Steven Spielberg absolutely loves, and he talks about it every chance he gets. He says, "Oh, I really like the first one, but what Jim did in the second one is just unbelievable." Like, he gets all excited like a little kid. But Superman the movie, a film that is now 47 years old. Yeah, it's more than 47 years old. Released Christmas 1978. A great movie, an origin story, and it tells a thrilling story of good guys and bad guys, and not really worse guys. This is not a movie where the government, they're not really the bad guys. Well, they're not the bad guys at all. Bad guy is Lex Luthor. Gene Hackman is phenomenal as Luthor. A lot of comic book purists were a little upset. Well, this isn't really a comic accurate Lex. He's not this much of a clown and a Joker, the Joker. But I think Hackman crushes it. And Brando brought the gravitas. And he puts the film on very solid footing, even if he didn't give a shit. He's Brando. There are some people who are just that good. And it is fair to say that Marlon Brando was one of the greatest film actors who ever lived. He just was fantastic. I mean, look at him, Apocalypse Now with Coppola. He also showed up and acted like he didn't give a shit, and he's mesmerizing every second he's on screen because he's Marlon fucking Brando. So those are my thoughts. I understand I'm a little jumbled when it comes to Superman the movie, talking about Reeve, and but this is a film I've probably seen at least 15 times from start to finish, and I do enjoy checking out what movie reactors think of this film in particular. Think about, compare, and it's always fun to do this, whether, it could be boxers, right? It's always fun to compare who would have won and say, well, who was the best Clark Kent out of Christopher Reeve, David Corenswet, or Henry Cavill? Who made the best Superman? Who was the most believable Lex Luthor? All of these great questions. Who was the best Jor-El? Now you add Bradley Cooper to the mix with the other two big hitters in Russell Crowe and Marlon Brando. But that's all I wanted to say. I want to thank you so much for joining me on this ride home on Wednesday night with me not feeling that great, but I've had a good day, and I sincerely hope that you've enjoyed this episode, the newest entry in our continuing series of the great movies, Richard Donner's OG 1978 Superman, starring Christopher Reeve, Marlon Brando, Margot Kidder, Gene Hackman, Valerie Perrine, and a very funny Ned Beatty. I'll skip the exaggerated wrap-up and just wish you a great rest of your night, and I'll see you real soon. Peace.